I stood on the soaking wet pavement, wiping rain out of my eyes as my brother Brandon waved at me from my own bedroom window. My father had just slammed the front door shut, while my mother stood behind him with a cold, satisfied smile on her face. They thought throwing me into the street after I paid off their $310,000 mortgage was the end of my story. But what they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that I didn't pay off their debt. I bought it. Sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the first to drop you until karma catches up. If you think I did the right thing by taking back what was mine, let me know in the comments. And tell me, which city are you watching from right now? And what time is it over there? Drop your city and local time below. I'm reading every single comment. My name is Clara, and for 30 years, I lived under the dangerous delusion that family was everything. I grew up believing that loyalty to your bloodline was an unspoken contract, a sacred promise that if you poured your heart, your time, and your money into protecting the people who gave you life, they would cover your back when the storm hit. I was a senior accountant, a woman who spent 80 hours a week crunching numbers for multi-million-dollar corporations, managing balance sheets down to the exact cent. Yet I was completely blind to the massive financial and emotional fraud happening inside my own childhood home in Denver. From the day I landed my first entry-level job at 22, my parents, Richard and Margaret, made one thing abundantly clear. My purpose in that house was to be the pillar. My younger brother, Brandon, was the golden child. Brandon was 2 years younger than me, but in my parents' eyes, he walked on water. If Brandon wanted a new laptop for college, Clara paid for it. If Brandon wanted to take a summer vacation to clear his head, Clara covered his rent. If my father's small hardware repair shop had a bad quarter, Clara wrote the check to keep the utilities running. I convinced myself that this was what a good daughter did. I took pride in being the responsible one, the unshakable rock who held the family together through every financial crisis. My mother, Margaret, had a subtle, devastating way of manipulating me. She never demanded anything outright. Instead, she used weaponized guilt. She would sit at the kitchen table, wiping away non-existent tears, whispering about how hard my father worked, how weak his heart was, and how terrifying it was to think about losing the roof over our heads. She would look me dead in the eye and say, "Clara, you're the strong one. Your brother is fragile. He has his whole future ahead of him. But you're our savior." And like a fool, I drank every drop of that poison. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. I skipped dinners with friends, canceled vacations, and wore 5-year-old clothes just so I could deposit every leftover dollar into my parents' bank accounts. I ignored every warning sign. I turned a blind eye to the way Brandon looked at me, not with gratitude, but with smug entitlement, as if my hard-earned salary was something he was naturally owed by birthright. I ignored the way my father only spoke to me when a bill was due, and how my mother only held my hand when she needed me to sign a document. I truly believed that sacrifice was the highest form of love. I thought that by carrying their burdens, I was earning my place in their hearts. I didn't realize that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister at all. I was just an interest-free loan that they never intended to repay. For 6 long years, my life was reduced to a strict, punishing routine. Wake up at 5 in the morning, work until 8 at night, and transfer every spare dollar back home. When my father's health started declining and his shop stopped bringing in steady income, the full weight of the $310,000 mortgage fell entirely on my shoulders. $3,200 a month, month after month, year after year. While my coworkers were buying their first condos, investing in stocks, or traveling abroad, every single cent of my disposable income went straight to First National Bank to keep the bank from foreclosing on our family home in Denver. I lived in a tiny, windowless bedroom at the end of the hall, the smallest room in the house. Meanwhile, Brandon occupied the master suite upstairs, complete with a private bathroom, a king-sized bed, and a custom gaming setup that I had unwittingly financed through emergency personal loans my mother begged me to cover. Whenever I brought up the idea of moving out to get an apartment closer to my accounting firm, my mother would break down into hysterical sobs. "How could you abandon us, Clara?" she would wail, wringing her hands at the kitchen table. "If you leave, the bank will take everything. Do you want your father to die of a heart attack on the street? Do you want to ruin Brandon's life before he even gets started?" So I stayed. I stayed and I bled myself dry. Over those 6 years, I paid off $310,000 in principal and interest. On top of that, I covered $18,000 of Brandon's tuition fees after he dropped out of his second semester, $12,000 in property taxes, and thousands more in groceries, medical bills, and home repairs. I surrendered my 20s so my family could live in comfort. I turned down a major promotion in Seattle, a role that would have doubled my salary, simply because moving away meant I wouldn't be physically present to manage my parents' chaos. The only person who saw through the charade was my best friend, Chloe. Chloe was a sharp, pragmatic corporate paralegal who had watched me drown in my family's demands for years. We would sit in a coffee shop near my office, and she would look at my pale face and worn-out clothes with deep frustration. "Clara, they are eating you alive," she told me endlessly. "You are not their daughter, you are their cash machine. Have they ever asked you how your day was? Have they ever bought you a single meal? You're burning yourself alive just to keep people warm who wouldn't even pour a glass of water on you if you were on fire." I always defended them. "You don't understand, Chloe," I would reply, holding on to my naive illusions. "They're my family. They're just stressed. Once the mortgage is paid off, things will change. My dad will relax, Brandon will find a job, and we'll finally be a normal, happy family." Chloe would just shake her head, looking at me with a mix of pity and exasperation. "People don't change when you satisfy their greed, Clara," she warned. "They just demand more." By the spring of 2026, the finish line was finally in sight. The remaining mortgage balance was down to $45,000. I worked overtime every single weekend, took on freelance tax auditing contracts late into the night, and survived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I was exhausted down to my bones, but the thought of handing my parents the deed to a fully paid-off home kept me going. I imagined the tears of gratitude in my mother's eyes, the proud hand on my shoulder from my father, and the respect I had craved my entire life. I thought that paying off that house would finally make me worthy of their love. I had no idea that the moment the money left my account, my value in that house would drop to absolute zero. It was a rainy Tuesday night in late July when I finally made the last payment. I sat at my desk at the accounting firm until 11 o'clock, staring at the bank confirmation screen. $45,000, the very last drop of my savings, wired directly to the mortgage servicer. The account balance on my laptop read 0, but my heart felt lighter than it had in 6 years. The $310,000 debt was officially wiped out. The house was completely 100% debt-free. I drove home through the pouring Denver rain with a broad smile on my face, clutching the printed wire transfer receipt in my bag like a trophy. I couldn't wait to see their faces. I imagined walking into the living room, setting the receipt on the coffee table, and watching the relief wash over my parents. I thought about how my mother would hug me, how my father would finally stop looking so defeated, and how we would celebrate as a family. I unlocked the front door at midnight, stepping into the quiet foyer. The house was warm, smelling faintly of the expensive roast beef dinner my mother had cooked earlier, a dinner I hadn't been invited to eat because I was working overtime to pay for it. I shook off my wet coat, picked up my gym bag, and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom at the back of the house, eager to change out of my damp clothes before waking my parents with the news. I reached out my hand to grab my bedroom doorknob, but my fingers hit cold, hard metal instead. I stopped. I blinked, pulling out my phone to shine the flashlight on the door. The familiar brass doorknob was gone. In its place was a brand new, sleek, digital electronic keypad lock. A sharp blue light glowed on the number panel. I pressed my thumb against the handle, but it was firmly locked shut. "What the—" I whispered to myself, completely bewildered. Before I could process what I was looking at, the door to the master suite at the end of the hall opened, and my brother Brandon stepped out. He was wearing brand new noise-canceling headphones around his neck, holding a glass of juice. He didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he looked utterly bored. "Brandon?" I asked, pointing at my door. "Why is there a lock on my room? Where's my key?" Brandon took a slow sip of his drink, leaned back against the wall, and looked at me with a flat, cold expression. "It's not your room anymore, Clara. I moved my gym equipment and gaming setup in there. We needed the extra space." A knot formed in my stomach. "What are you talking about? My clothes are in there. My laptop charger, my documents, my entire life is in that room. Put the code in." "Your stuff is right there," Brandon said casually, nodding toward the corner of the hallway near the back door. I turned my flashlight toward the dark corner. Sitting on the cold hardwood floor was a single black trash bag, loosely tied at the top. My winter coat was sticking out of the plastic. "Is this a joke?" My voice trembled, panic rising in my chest. "I just spent the last 6 years paying off this house. I literally just sent the final $45,000 to the bank an hour ago. Call Mom and Dad right now." "We don't need to call them." My father's heavy voice boomed from the top of the stairs. I looked up. My father, Richard, stood on the landing in his bathrobe, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind him stood my mother, Margaret. She wasn't crying. She wasn't wringing her hands. She was standing tall, resting her chin on my father's shoulder, watching me with a chilly, distant smile. "Dad," I gasped, holding up the printed bank paper. "Dad, it's done. The mortgage is paid off. We own the house outright. Tell Brandon to open my room." My father slowly walked down the steps, his face devoid of any warmth. He didn't even glance at the paper in my hand. He stopped 3 feet away from me, looking down at me as if I were a stranger who had broken into his living room. "We know it's paid off, Clara," my father said, his tone unnervingly calm. "We got the email notification from the bank 20 minutes ago, and now that the house is clear, we've made some family decisions. Brandon is 28. He needs his own space to host friends and start his life. He's taking your room for his office and gym." "Then where am I supposed to sleep?" I yelled, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. "I paid for this house, every single brick of it." "You're 30 years old, Clara," my mother chimed in from the stairs, her voice sweet, high, and entirely fake. "You have a great job at that accounting firm. You can easily afford a nice apartment in the city. You've outgrown this house. It's time for you to move on and let your brother have his turn." "Move on?" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls I had bought for them. "I have $0 in my bank account right now because I gave every last dime to your mortgage. I don't have enough money for a security deposit on an apartment." "That sounds like a personal budgeting problem," Brandon smirked, tossing a key ring up and down in his hand. "You're an accountant, aren't you? Figure it out." "Get out of my way," I said, stepping toward my bedroom door to punch in random numbers on the keypad. "I'm getting my things." Before my hand could touch the lock, my father stepped into my path. He didn't hit me, and he didn't leave a mark, but his hand gripped my upper arm with an iron crush, physically pulling me back toward the front entrance. His fingers dug deeply into my coat sleeve as he marched me toward the foyer. "You don't dictate terms in my house, Clara," my father growled in my ear, his breath hot and stale. "We don't need your attitude, and we don't need you anymore. You've done your part." He threw open the front door. The icy night air and driving rain blasted into the warm entryway. With one firm shove against my shoulder, he forced me out onto the slippery wooden porch. Brandon tossed my gym bag and the single black trash bag onto the wet porch steps behind me. I spun around, soaking wet in seconds, reaching for the door frame. "Dad, please, it's freezing. Just let me sleep on the couch tonight." My mother stepped up beside my father. She looked down at me standing in the rain, raised her hand and gave me a little wave. Her lips curved into that horrifying, satisfied smile. "Good night, Clara," she said softly. My father grabbed the brass handle and slammed the heavy oak door shut in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a heavy, definitive click. I stood there in the pouring rain, the cold water soaking through my clothes, turning my skin numb. Through the glass panel beside the door, I saw my brother walk into the kitchen, grab a slice of cake from the counter, and laugh with my father. They didn't look back once. They had used me to clear their debt, stripped me of every dollar I possessed, and discarded me onto the pavement like garbage the exact second I outlived my usefulness. I didn't cry on the drive to Chloe's apartment. My mind went completely blank, frozen in a state of sheer shock as the windshield wipers slapped rhythmically against the glass. By 1:30 a.m., I was sitting on Chloe's living room sofa, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug of tea that I was too numb to drink. My wet clothes were piled in her bathroom, and my single black trash bag sat by her front door, the sum total of my 30 years on this earth. Chloe stood over her kitchen island, pacing back and forth in her pajamas, her face flushed with absolute fury. "I want to go over there right now and smash their windows," she breathed, her voice trembling with indignation. "Clara, they put you on the street in a rainstorm. After $310,000, that is criminal. We are calling the police first thing in the morning. We are suing them for every single dime." "The police won't do anything, Chloe," I said quietly, staring into the dark amber tea. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "The house is in my father's name. They'll just tell the officers it's a domestic civil dispute over residency, and a lawsuit will take 2 years, cost tens of thousands in attorney fees I don't have, and by the time it reaches a judge, they'll have transferred the title or taken out a new equity loan." I closed my eyes, and for a few minutes, the silence in the apartment was deafening. I thought about my mother's smiling face behind the glass. I thought about my father's rough grip on my arm. I thought about Brandon playing video games in the bedroom I spent 6 years paying for. Every tear I had suppressed over the last decade seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, heavy weight settling in the pit of my stomach. The naive, desperate daughter who just wanted her parents to love her died on that wet porch. I set the teacup down on the glass table. The numbness was gone. In its place was a sharp, mathematical clarity. "Wait," I whispered, opening my eyes. Chloe paused, looking at me carefully. "What?" "When I structured the final mortgage buyout payment 6 months ago," I began, my accountant's brain suddenly connecting pieces I had filed away under routine paperwork. First National Bank didn't just accept monthly transfers from my personal account. Because my father had defaulted twice on his property taxes in 2024, the bank required a guarantor agreement to prevent foreclosure. Chloe leaned forward, her paralegal instincts instantly kicking in. "Go on." "My father thought I was just co-signing a loan modification," I continued, a slow, cold focus washing over me. "He didn't read the fine print. I paid off the original bank mortgage, yes, but I didn't pay it off as a gift. I executed a formal assignment of debt and mortgage note transfer through my secondary corporate LLC that I used for freelance consulting. The bank didn't extinguish the lien. They assigned the $310,000 primary mortgage lien directly to me." Chloe's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "Are you saying—" "I am saying my father doesn't own that house free and clear," I said, a dark, quiet calm settling over my heart. "I am the primary lien holder. He owes $310,000 to my company, and according to the terms of the default clause he signed when I covered his last tax penalty, he is 30 days past due on his restructuring agreement." I looked up at Chloe. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't weeping. I wasn't begging. I was calculating. They think they threw me out with nothing. They have no idea that tomorrow morning, I own their home. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I wasn't weeping over lost family ties. I was sitting in a high-rise office building in downtown Denver, pulling up deeds, mortgage notes, and certified tax receipts. Chloe sat beside me, sifting through the binding assignment agreement I had executed through my secondary entity, Vance Clara Holdings, LLC. My father and brother had assumed that paying off a bank meant the debt vanished into thin air. In their financial ignorance, they didn't realize that when a third party satisfies a defaulting mortgage under a formal assignment contract, the debt doesn't die, it changes hands. I held a $310,000 first position lien against the property, fully backed by an acceleration clause that triggered total repayment if the property owner engaged in fraudulent conveyance or defaulted on secondary tax agreements. My father had defaulted on 3 separate property tax assessments between 2024 and 2025, every single one of which I had quietly cleared out of my own pocket under a recorded lender's lien. Step 1 was securing unassailable legal representation. Through Chloe's network, we retained Judge Anderson, a former state magistrate turned ruthless property litigation attorney who specialized in high-stakes asset recovery. Sitting across his mahogany desk, I presented the paper trail: 6 years of direct bank transfers from my personal payroll account, the notarized assignment of mortgage note from First National Bank, and the signed tax agreement bearing my father's sloppy signature. Judge Anderson reviewed the documents, leaned back in his leather chair, and let out a low whistle. Your father signed a total debt acceleration agreement when you paid off his tax delinquency in November, Judge Anderson said, pointing to line 14 of the contract. Under Colorado property law, as the primary lien holder, you have the absolute legal right to demand immediate full satisfaction of the $310,000 principal. If he fails to liquidate the balance within 10 business days, you can initiate expedited non-judicial foreclosure proceedings or execute a private debt sale. I don't want to wait through a 6-month foreclosure process, Judge, I said coldly, looking him dead in the eye. I want them out, and I want it done with brutal efficiency. Then we execute a private debt assignment to a commercial cash investor, Judge Anderson replied with a sharp smile. And I know the exact man for the job. Enter Donald Vance, a high-profile, no-nonsense real estate investor known across Denver for buying distressed debt notes and turning them into luxury rental properties. An hour later, Donald Vance walked into the conference room, tossed his coat over a chair, and scanned my financial filings. The house is in a prime neighborhood, Vance noted, his eyes scanning the property appraisal. Current market value is roughly $650,000. You hold a clear $310,000 first position lien. If I buy this note from you today, I can file an immediate emergency petition for possession based on uncured tax defaults. I will sell you the debt note for $280,000 cash today, I offered smoothly. On one condition, you execute an immediate, non-negotiable 30-day notice to vacate served directly by the sheriff's department, and you liquidate the property publicly. Vance didn't hesitate. Done. By 2 p.m., the wire transfer hit my fresh, unencumbered bank account at a brand new institution, $280,000. For the first time in my adult life, I was financially independent, fully liquid, and completely severed from my family's parasitic grasp. Step 2 was public exposure. My family had built their entire social standing on the lie that my brother Brandon was a successful entrepreneur and my father was a self-made property owner. I met with reporter Amanda, an investigative journalist for a local Denver news outlet who was currently running a series on predatory family financial abuse and estate fraud. I handed reporter Amanda an audited folder containing every bounced check, every abusive text message from Brandon demanding cash, the wire receipts showing I paid off the house, and the video footage from Chloe's dash cam showing my father dragging me out into the rain while my mother smiled. "This is harrowing, Clara," reporter Amanda said, her hands shaking slightly as she reviewed the dash cam footage. "Are you comfortable with us running this story alongside the upcoming public auction announcement?" "I don't just want you to run it, Amanda," I replied, leaning in. "I want you to bring a camera crew to the house on the day the sheriff serves the eviction." 2 weeks later, the sky over Denver was clear and bright, a sharp contrast to the stormy night my family threw me out like trash. I sat inside a sleek black SUV parked across the street from my childhood home, dressed in a tailored blazer, sipping iced coffee beside Donald Vance and Judge Anderson. Down the block, a local news van pulled up silently. Reporter Amanda and her cameraman stepped out, setting up discreet lenses from the sidewalk. At exactly 10 a.m., 2 Denver County Sheriff's patrol cars pulled into the driveway. I watched through the tinted window as Deputy Miller stepped out, holding a thick stack of certified court documents, an emergency warrant for possession, and a formal 24-hour notice to vacate issued by Judge Anderson's court. Deputy Miller walked up the porch steps and pounded heavily on the wooden front door. A few seconds later, the door swung open. My brother Brandon stepped out onto the porch wearing sweatpants, holding a video game controller, looking annoyed. "Can I help you?" Brandon asked loudly, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "We're trying to sleep." "Are you Brandon?" Deputy Miller asked neutrally, pulling a document from his folder. "We are here to serve a court-ordered warrant for immediate possession and execution of lien writ on behalf of Vance Capital Investments." Brandon chuckled nervously, waving his hand dismissively. "You've got the wrong house, officer. My dad owns this place free and clear. We paid off the mortgage 2 weeks ago." "Your father had an unrecorded title," Deputy Miller corrected firmly, stepping closer, "which was subject to a $310,000 primary lien transferred under an enforceable debt assignment. That lien was sold to Vance Capital, who triggered an immediate default foreclosure due to 3 years of unpaid tax judgments. You are trespassing on commercial property." My father, Richard, came rushing to the front door, his face bright red, wearing his unbuttoned shirt. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted, shoving Brandon aside. "Get off my lawn. I own this home." "You don't own a single nail in this structure, Mr. Richard," Donald Vance said smoothly, opening the SUV door and stepping onto the driveway with Judge Anderson and me right behind him. My father froze. His eyes locked onto mine as I walked up the driveway, calm, unbothered, and entirely in control. My mother, Margaret, rushed out onto the porch behind them, clutching her robe around her chest, her face pale as a sheet when she noticed reporter Amanda's camera crew filming from the curb. "Clara!" my mother gasped, her voice shrill and trembling. "Clara, what is this circus? Tell these people to leave." "I can't do that, Mom," I said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping my hands resting comfortably in my pockets. "I sold the mortgage note. You remember the mortgage you begged me to pay off? You didn't pay it off. I bought it. And 2 days ago, I sold the entire debt to Donald Vance for cash." My father's jaw dropped. He looked frantically between Judge Anderson, Deputy Miller, and the legal papers in the officer's hands. You can't do that. That's illegal. You gave us that money." "Check line 14 of the tax restructuring agreement you signed in 2024, Richard," Judge Anderson chimed in, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You assigned primary lien rights to Vance Clara Holdings, LLC. You defaulted on 3 tax assessments. The debt was accelerated, assigned, and lawfully sold. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal identification and leave the premises before you are arrested for criminal trespass." "30 minutes!" Brandon shrieked, his cocky persona entirely evaporating as he looked at the uniformed officers. "All my gaming gear is inside. My clothes, my gym equipment." "The interior assets are currently under a court attachment order to cover unpaid back property taxes," Deputy Miller stated coldly, gesturing toward 2 movers who were already unlatching the back of a large moving truck parked down the curb. My mother burst into desperate, hysterical sobs, rushing down 2 steps toward me. "Clara, please, we're your family. How could you do this to your own mother? Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no longing for her approval, just an empty, peaceful void. "You told me 2 weeks ago that being 30 meant I could easily afford to figure it out," I said softly, repeating her exact words back to her. "You said it was time to move on, so Figure it out. I turned my back on them. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I heard my father screaming at Brandon, blaming him for changing the locks, while my mother wept openly for the news cameras. Within an hour, their names were splashed across the local afternoon news alongside reporter Amanda's story detailing their financial abuse, destroying their social standing in Denver forever. Brandon was forced to move into a tiny rundown studio apartment financed by his entry-level retail job, while my parents moved into a rented trailer on the edge of town, with destroyed credit and zero assets left to their names. I got into my SUV, pulled up my banking app on my phone, and stared at the clean $280,000 balance. The next day, I signed the lease on a beautiful, sunlit two-bedroom condo overlooking the Denver skyline. I changed my phone number, severed every remaining link to my past, and finally started living my life for myself. They tried to throw me out in the cold, but all they really did was set me free.